but I'm sure.
Yes, please. Thank you, Tullio.
So yes, multi-core in space is an interesting subject. We see this beast arriving, and I would like to first thank you, everybody, to inviting Isa to discuss about this subject, and I will try to organize my presentation along the following lines. So try to explain why we have multi-cores, well, my perspective. Try to look at our project and understand if really we need this multi-core. If we need them, how are we going to use them? Because there are many ways. Do we have the product available to put them in project? If we have products, how do they perform in real time? Because real time is one of our main concerns for onboard software. And then we will have to face reality and to understand if we can ever be hard real time and to take some conclusion and open some perspectives about that. So why multi-core exists? Well, I think that this debate has been open already, and what we have today in the space electronics is monocore. Monocore, which are based on SPARC architecture, SPARC V7, then SPARC V8. So we call it ERC32, which was the V7. We call it Leon, with many variants, depending if you add an FPU or an MMU. And the best we can achieve for the moment is, you see, around 85 MIPS and a frequency of 100 MHz. And the frequency is one of the issues that we have because we cannot increase that much the frequency. We have a problem of power. And there is an example of Intel who tried to make a chip at 7 GHz, and in fact the power which was used and dissipated was 150 watts, which is a sort of bubbles that you can have in a room, which is much too much for us. In space we are limited in terms of power. We have only the solar panel to get the power that we need. And the processor should not consume more than a watt. Generally it is below a watt. So we cannot increase the frequency like that because we will consume too much power. We have also a limitation in the technology that we use. Because in space you can receive some what we call single event upset. So there are heavy ions which cross everything in the universe. And when they hit the electronic, they can change the value of a bit. It's a bit flip in the memory. And of course, your software is done. So you have also another effect, which is a total dose. So you have some radiation which hits the electronic and which little by little accumulates some charges in the transistors. And after a time, you have a short circuit, you have a latch up, and your electronic is destroyed. So we need a particular technology at silicon level to make the chips less sensitive to heavy ions and to radiation. And this limits us in terms of frequency as well. So the best we can get today is on 16.5 nanomillimeter, is to get about 400 megahertz. So if we want to go further, we cannot. So the only option would be the multi-core. Multi-core, if we look at the commercial world, as Tullio said, can we use the chips from the commercial world? So when the first dual-core arrived with Intel, the guy from Intel said, well, the consumer doesn't need to know what is in the PC, what he needs is power, and the dual-core is this piece of magic which is inside the computer and which will deliver the power. Yes, nice. But us, we have a spacecraft which is upstairs. If it crashes, we cannot raise the hand and push the reset button. It doesn't work. So we need to have the total control of what is inside. We have to understand how it works. We have to understand the software. It cannot be magic for us. And why is it magic? Because there are problems which are hidden inside. And one of the problems is the memory wall. In fact, if you want to deliver oxygen to 4 cores, if you have a single pipe for that, all the guys are going to suffer a little bit because the flow of air is limited. And this is what happened in a multi-core. You have 4 cores, yes, but you have a single bus to access to the memory, and therefore you have problems with the bus consumption. And what you see is that if you increase very much the number of cores, in fact, in the beginning you win a little bit, some throughput, but at the end you degrade the performance. So how to solve this problem? But it's not magic. So we could increase the memory transfer speed, but then again we have the problem of power. We could increase the diameter of the pipe, but then we need some pins around the processor, and then you have a chip like that. It doesn't work. You can, of course, there is a cache, so you put some more memory in the processor to try to put it closer to the core of the computation. But to put memory on the chip is very expensive because it's not the same technology between the computer and the RAM. You could do the other way, but we don't have in space the right technology as well. So we have caches with hierarchy. We have cache L1, L2, and so on. And the cache has some policy. When you write on the cache, when the processor or one core write on the cache, you could either leave it like that and then reuse it after, or you can propagate later on to the main memory. And this is the write-through or the write-back. This creates difficulty, creates complexity in the behavior, unpredictability in the behavior, and for software people, it is not very friendly. So we have multi-core in the commercial world, but we are a bit scared about them. So do we really need multi-core in space? And this is a chart which shows the main spacecraft of Astrium, in particular. And what is interesting is that there is a reference here, which is the ERC32, which was about 10 MIPS. And you can see that around this reference, these triangles are the spacecraft which are currently or are going to be developed by Astrium. And you can see that their need is around this initial one. And the future, the next generation of processor, which are the Leon, are here. So they give already some margin compared to what we need today. So what is interesting here is that, in fact, for the moment, we don't have an immediate need of the multi-core. We can survive some years without. However, after, we will have to do other things. And in particular, we have needs for the control systems. So there is a particular program which I hope will be confirmed in the next ESA ministerial, which is called Lunar Lander. And the ambition of this program is to go to the moon, to descend on the moon, and to deliver on the moon a lot of things. In the long term, there would be rovers, there could be people, and so on. So this is a dream in the next 20, 30 years. But the short term is to have a descender which navigates, which separates from the orbiter, navigates around the moon, and try to find a landing site. So there will be camera with a navigation system. There will be sensors, like, for example, laser to sense the altitude. And all these sensors will be fusioned to understand where the descender is. The images will be analyzed to find a good site for the landing, because you don't want to land on a rock or something like that. So everything will be analyzed in real time. And after, there will be the control loop to get the descent and to arrive on the moon exactly at the right place. And this requires a lot of CPU. So we have put here for the various guidance on navigation some example of or estimation of MIPS that we would need. And you can see 100 MIPS, 120, 200 MIPS. It's a lot, and it's more than what we can deliver today with the processors that we have. For the control also, we will have some missions where you have formation flying, and you need to have all the spacecraft keeping their distance with a precision which is enormous. And for that, you need specific algorithm, you need a lot of throughput to get the right precision. Also, if you want to make rendezvous, so today we know how to make rendezvous between ATV, for example, on the space station. We might need to make rendezvous with what we call non-cooperative target, which are targets who does not want a priori to be rendezvous with someone else. And one of the use of this is to rescue spacecraft, or to deorbit spacecraft. So you have heard recently that on Envisat, which is a big spacecraft like this room, we have lost control with Envisat. It was working so well, it had exceeded its lifetime of double, so it was for 10 years and it was already more than 15. And suddenly we lost it. And now we have this huge stuff which is circulating in orbit, like that, without any control. So a priori it's not a problem, except that during the operation, when Envisat was still responding, the operators had to make avoidance maneuver from time to time, because there was debris there. And in fact, they had to escape the debris from time to time on the orbit. Now they cannot operate the spacecraft. If Envisat meets a debris on his orbit, boom, explosion, more debris everywhere. So it is very urgent, if we don't want to pollute the orbit, to deorbit this big spacecraft. So how to do that? We send another spacecraft, which has to, to follow the Envisat and to connect to it and to use his own energy to deorbit it. But if you want to connect to it, Envisat is turning like that, and the connection point is hidden by a solar panel. So you need to have someone who arrives and enter and, and connect to Envisat while it is turning, and then after to take it off. This requires a lot of CPU, of energy, and throughput. Other needs that we are going to have are the payload. For the payload, we need a lot of throughput, and we have been reported by astronaut Ness that for Earth observation, the precision in the resolution in the images are increasing and increasing from 25 meters down to 1.5 meters, 30 times more MIPS needed. Gaia, which is a science mission who has to map the stars. You have a picture of Gaia here. All around the spacecraft, you have CCDs all around, which are taking pictures, and the spacecraft is moving like that. And you have to process all these pictures, to gather them, and to send it to ground. MTG, which is Meteosat third generation, so for Meteo, is even more complicated than Gaia, and needs 30% more throughput. So today we managed to do it. Why? Because we use PowerPC. But the PowerPC is not radared. So if we want to be protected against radiation, we have to triplicate. 2 to detect the error, a third one to be able to vote who is right or who is wrong. 3 PowerPC, 3 times more power, and we don't have power. So it's a big problem today. We cannot cope with this problem as we would like. And Euclid, which is a future mission, needs also to look at the dark energy and the dark matter in the universe. And here you will have also CCD, photospectrometers, and you will need to make a lot of computation because you cannot download in real time all the data that are in the spacecraft. You need first to pre-process them and then to get down. This is a strategy that the Americans are using since long, and for that purpose they develop multi-cores of 30 or 40 cores. But they have their own technology, they have a lot of money, we don't have this money. But for Euclid we will have the problem. We could do science payload with a DSP. Someone would have asked the question. We don't have DSP because we need a radar DSP and it doesn't exist, so we would need to make a specific development. It's too expensive. We would need to buy an architecture and then implement it on a radar technology. It is in the process of being analyzed. We might have one in 5-10 years, but for the moment we don't have. Autonomy is another need where we could need power. So here are the 4 autonomy levels which are foreseen today in our standard. 1, 2, 3 are already implemented, but they don't use a lot of throughput. Number 4 is more important because it is about goal-oriented operation on board. So you have a software component which is a planner and deliver the plan from high-level objectives. And from the plan, you derive the schedule, you derive all the actions to be done. And you can go further, and this is the goal of a component which is called ARFA. We have made a prototype for onboard software. It is 2 things, a model-based FDIR. FDIR is a fault detection, isolation, and recovery. So on board it is a fault management. We have a model-based fault management on board, and a prognosis tool associated to that. The benefit is that the planner delivers a plan. The plan is entered in the prognosis component, who try to foresee the future. Take the information from the model-based fault management and try to understand if it is feasible or not. If it is feasible, okay. If not, he asks the planner to replan by taking him that it doesn't work. So these components ensure a lot of autonomy. You don't need operators to talk to the spacecraft during several days. However, they consume a lot. So one loop of all this activity has been measured 4 minutes about, less than 4 minutes, which is too much. With the Leon 3, it's not enough. So we might need multi-core for that. Finally, the last use case for the multi-core could be what we call the integrated modular avionic, which is derived from the aeronautic. And the purpose is to save electronic by having an electronic which is more powerful and putting several software components on the same electronic. To do that, you use a particular operating system which implements the concept of time and space partitioning. And you can segregate all your software and put them on the same hardware, and they will not perturbate each other. So the use case are to put, for example, several payload control software on the same payload controller. And this has been done by CNES with their logiciel de vol charge utile générique for French people. We could have on the same computer the platform software and the payload software. We could have the Star Tracker software with the onboard software, leaving alone the head of the Star Tracker. So this would save a bit of electronic in the Star Tracker. And for the rocket, we envisage to group also on the same computer the IMU, so the inertial central, the GPS, and the GNT software and the onboard software. So all the software on the same computer. And here, of course, the ERC32 or Leon doesn't work. So it is interesting. There are some other drawbacks of this system that I don't expand here, but it is a use case also for the multi-core. So multi-core or not multi-core, I think that the COT multi-cores that we have today, they are good at giving performance, but they are not really hard real-time. Or we need hard real-time, in particular for the control algorithm. If we miss a loop at the speed where it is run when you land on the moon, you cannot afford that. So probably we need the multi-core. So I would say personally that multi-core is a necessary evil, and we will have to suffer them as software people. Fortunately, the good news is that we have a bit of time to do this sort of thing. So if we have multi-cores, how are we going to use them? So we have made a survey of the programming models which are in other domains at space. And for example, AUTOSAR, it's relatively static, so they allocate the task to the computer. And they have message queues to communicate. our colleagues of the BSC, Barcelona Supercomputing Centers, they have not really a multi-core but a many-core, so they have some heterogeneity in their system. And they have a specific compiler which is aware of what has to be done on the architecture. For the space domain, it's a bit difficult to have a specific compiler because if we have one, we have to maintain it, and it's expensive, and we don't have enough customers to, to have a community investment. So space domain is a small community, so it's a little bit expensive to have something specific there. Mars is also something similar, which is for the GPU architectures. There is an architecture that I like particularly, which is nomadic from ST Ericsson, which is based on components. So you consider your application as a global one, you cut it into components, and then you have a deployment view where you allocate the components to the various cores of your architecture, multi or many core. And this, we recognize something, because we are working on a space onboard software reference architecture, which is called Cordet. And this is the purpose, to cut the global architecture in components and to deploy on the hardware that you want, and to be independent from the hardware. So we see here a good relation between the work that we do on architecture and the multi-core. Then you can have various development environment, APIs, and so on. So what we learn from that is that we need a dedicated programming model for us, for the embedded software, for space software, and the component model could be a good solution. More detail below the component model, we have 3 options to implement the operating system and the access to the hardware. The bare metal, so no operating system. The asymmetric multiprocessor and the symmetric multithreading. So asymmetric means that you pre-allocate the processor to the task. And this works well, provided that you don't have a lot of communication between the various elements. So within an onboard software, it doesn't work. But if you want to group, for IMA, for example, if you want to group a payload on the platform, they talk a bit together, but you can control the communication, so this could work. The symmetric, it's easy for software, so you put your application and the operating system managed in the core and send everything, the task to the core. It balances the load of the processor. And this could be used for payload, because we lose a little bit the real-time aspect. We don't know exactly how the operating system will do the job. So for payloads, we need performance, we need a little bit less real time, so we could use this symmetric model for the payload. There is an interesting coincidence. For me, it's a coincidence, and a lot of people make an amalgam between the two concepts, the IMA and the multi-core. Because IMA, the principle is to segregate your software in pieces that you put in partition, and the partitions, they don't talk to each other. Well, they are separated. And the cores, in a multi-core, are sort of natural partition. So some people say, okay, I am going to use the same technology. And you have strategy saying that you can consider partitions or multi-core as distributed system. And therefore, if for partitioning you use an hypervisor, well, you use also an hypervisor for multi-core, and it is the same, and it works, and the life is beautiful. Well, it is not really beautiful. What is interesting is that if you have already cut your software in pieces for time and space partitioning, therefore you can reuse this architecture for the multi-core. You are already segregated. This is true. Some people say that dependability, if we have a multi-core, we are going to have a natural redundancy. We have several cores. If one fails, we can use another one. I don't really agree, because generally when a chip fails, it fails with the power, with the clock, or with something which is across all the cores. So I think that all the chip will fail on not already one core. And if you want to reconfigure on cores, you need to have some available, which is not always easy. So having the same technology for multi-core on TSP, yes, but there are issues which exist on the multi-core and maybe not on the monocore. Because with the multi-core, are you really time partitioning and space partition? I am not sure. The problem is that the real-time uncertainty which exists with multi-core affects the time partitioning. So the time slice which is given to a partition will have jitter, and I'm not sure it respects very much the model of time partitioning. Sharing the bus will affect the space partitioning. And most of the problems that we see are for the use for security. So time and space partitioning is in fact time and space and secured partitioning, because you can use TSP either for dependability, like for aircraft, or for security. So you partition your software, and each partition has a different level of security. So this is for a dual use case of security. The problem is that security is much more demanding in terms of segregation between the partition. Because not only a partition cannot write on the other one, but also cannot read. Because if you read on the other partition, you spy, and you can detect a lot of things. So we want really in security totally high-level segregation. And the DME, for example, DMA for access, for example, is forbidden. So there would be way in the hardware to solve this problem, in particular by putting an IOMMU. You can put bus arbitration also to restore the time partitioning. You can have also policy with the cache, for example, to flush the cache when you switch from a partition to another one to avoid to leave history to the next one. We have been reported some security holes between the supervisor mode and the user mode in the cache data. So the modes can, spy what happened in the other part of the cache. So maybe we would need an hypervisor mode to make sure that security is respected, as well as permission in the cache access. So multi-core TSSP is not totally obvious, and I think that we should not mix the two concerns too quickly. So do we have products in space for multi-core? Yes, we have. We start to have, little by little. So the processor itself is called the NGMP, the new generation multiprocessor. It is based on Neon, so it is based on a Spark V8, which has been duplicated. So you can have 2 or 4. We don't go higher than 4 for the moment. So the need that we have, why we have this one, is because we don't want to have ITAR problems with our European processor. So we cannot use American processor because it could be protected suddenly. We need to have a low power, and we need to be low cost because we don't have enough money. The Americans, they put billions of dollars on their chips. We cannot afford that. So that's why we use an open architecture like the Spark V8. And we put it on, after we adapt it a little bit, and we put it on European technology. So the description of the NGMP, you can find it on the Geisler Research website. So I don't enter into the details. You will find there the nice architecture. You will find here the way that the 4 processors are connected. You have everything you need. You have a cache, L1, L2, you have plenty of things. MMU, I think you have FPU sometimes. You can share an FPU also. So you have a lot of things in this NGMP. It is relatively sophisticated. You have a cache which have a lot of policy. You can configure policy for the cache, even the random access. The cache L2 can be copy back or write through, not the L1. The L1 is write through only, and so on. In terms of software, to go with this NGMP, We have products which are delivered by Gessler, which goes with the chip. Operating system, RTEMS, Wind River, VxWorks, and so on. Compilers also it delivers, as well as some utilities to go with it. I would like to mention PikeOS. PikeOS is an operating system which is based on an open source one, but now it is a commercial one. It is delivered by Cisco, who is a German company. PikeOS has been ported on the Space monocore, so the Leon 2, I think, Leon 3. And PikeOS exists on multicore, but not the NGMP. So that in the future we have the PikeOS on the NGMP. PikeOS implements time and space partitioning and secured partitioning. Us in ESA, what we are looking at for the moment is an open source hypervisor, which is called Xtratum, which is provided by the University of Valencia in Spain, and Fentis, and which is used by the CNES for their payload application. And this is for the asymmetric policy. For the symmetric one, we start to use RTEMS 411 in SMP on a dual core in collaboration with the CNES. We will have two ITT to call for tender in the near future. One very soon, which is about development environment on the multicore, which is actually about RTEMS on SMP. And next year, another one about schedulability analysis for multicore, because it's a big problem. I am very sorry to say in this audience that we don't look at ADA 2012, which is a big mistake that I recognize. However, as Tullio said, there are very few people at ESA which can carry this message. In our space industry, Astrium has given up to ADA. Astrium has pushed his software suppliers to give up on ADA. We only have Thales who carry ADA, and I think they are very successful with that one. But okay, so maybe through this collaboration with Thales, we could try to investigate the use of ADA for multicore. But it is not yet planned. So, it could be that we need multicore for space. It seems that we have products, or beginning of products, in terms of hardware and software. Now, these prototypes, how do they perform in real time? And can they, in fact, fulfill the needs that we see in the future? To investigate that, we have asked Barcelona Supercomputing Center to port their benchmark, their multicore benchmark, on the NGMP. And in fact, their benchmark tries to exercise the four main sources of inter-task interference. So what we have identified is the problem of the common bus, which access to the memory, the AMBA bus, the L2 cache, the shared memory controller, and the write-through policy of the L1 data cache. So I think I can spend a couple of seconds on this one. The L1 cache is only write-through. So we could imagine, and write-through, in fact, is a problem, because when you have an algorithm turning in a core, each time he writes in the L1 cache, immediately the L1 propagates to the memory, to L2, and then L2 to the memory. It consumes a lot of time. So we could believe that it's better to have the L1 is in write back, and therefore you decorrelate L1 from the rest of the electronic, and you are much more efficient in the core. However, we have here a problem of radiation hardening. Suppose that a single event upset or something hit the cache L1 and you have a bit flip. We need to correct that by hardware. The mechanism that we have today is a parity bit. So parity bit means that you detect and you inform someone that you have to reload the data because it has been corrupted. So if you have the cache L1 in write-through, L2 has been updated, you can reload from L2 in L1. And then your parity bit has been efficient and you have restored L1. Now suppose that you are right back, L1 is corrupted, you don't have a copy of L1, nowhere. So your parity bit cannot repair. So what do you need to do is to have a more sophisticated hardware mechanism, which is an EDAC, which will be able to correct by himself the error thanks to some algorithm. And this needs a lot of hardware support that we cannot afford because it's a lot of transistors, we don't have size, it consumes power, and it slows down everything. So the effect would be even maybe worse than having in write-through. So we have this L1 in write-through, and then it has an impact. And one of the impacts is that we need to be aware of that at software level and to write the algorithm in the correct way. I will mention that again later on in one of the benchmarks. So here we have 4 main sources of interference between tasks. So the benchmark has a main application which does nothing but consume CPU. And then, one after the others, they have added one of the sources of interference. And the results are the following. If you add 1, you slow down by a ratio of a little bit less than 2. Bon, okay. If you add 2 sources of interference, you go to 3 to 4. If you add 3 sources of interference, you are 9 times slower. And if you put the 4, you are up to 20 times slower. So this demonstrates that this magic multi-core hides a lot of surprise. Because the hardware, or if we misuse it in software, we could have an effect of 20 times slowdown. Well, what do we learn from that? We learn 2 things. First, that we might bound a worst-case execution time, which is a good news, in a way. The problem is that if we bound it with 20, what does it mean? When you need, for your descent lander, when you need 200 MIPS, if you have to foresee a worst case of 20 times less, you need 4,000 MIPS. 4,000 MIPS, we really don't have nowhere. So we cannot have pessimistic worst case like that. So this impacts a lot of unschedulability analysis, predictability, because we cannot have realistic worst case. This is a story about L1 that I explained, and I am not going to re-explain it. But it impacts on another benchmark that we have done. You remember that I mentioned the Euclid scientific project, which will arrive in the future. And we need to look at the dark matter in the universe, and we have a lot of CCDs on the spectrophotometers. And we need to crunch all the data on board because we cannot download everything. The space links is too narrow to download everything. So we need to pre-process on board. So there are some explanations of what we need to do. Basically, if we want to process all the pixels, we need 40 seconds, which doesn't work because the spacecraft is picking up the data at a much higher frequency. So 40 seconds, it doesn't work, so we need to find a solution. So what has been done is to prototype this on the multi-core. So 4 cores, so instead of 40 seconds, we should have 10 seconds. No. We improve of 1.8, so even not 2 with 4 cores. So it's a bit disappointing. I must say that it's a preliminary result. So we have some explanation for that. So one of the explanations is that we have done it on simulator, not on the hardware. So the simulator, we are not sure that it is really representative of the real time. So it might be better at the end. And second, the algorithm uses a lot the L1 cache and writes in L1. And because of the phenomenon that I explained before, it is slowing down everything. So if we rewrite the algorithm in another way, maybe we will be able to be a bit more efficient. Maybe we will reach between 2 to 3, but not 4, of course. So we learned that we have to carefully program our algorithm if we want to use multi-cores. So we have seen here that we have a relatively substantial problem with hard real time, and this we need to take back a little bit of perspective from this problem and try to see how we could tackle this problem. And for this, I am using some external activities, European project that a lot of you know about. And we happen to be in the boards of this program, and we learn a lot about them. And the first one is Meraza. Meraza tries to use, to develop a core on the multi-core for the purpose of being hard real-time. And they develop the hardware and they develop the tools which go with them to be hard real-time. So it demonstrates that it works. You can have a multi-core which works for our purpose. And now they are starting par Meraza, which is looking at also at the parallelization of tasks. The problem with that is that I am not sure that we will be able to have all these features in our multi-core US. Because, as I said, it is done by Gessler, and Gessler, what is the market of Gessler Research? It is not space, because he sells, I don't know, hundreds of chips, that's all. The market of Gessler is mobile telephone, is China, is India, is everywhere in the world, and they are driving what is inside the core. So when we come saying, I would like please a scratchpad for my space, he looks at us saying, who are you guys? Bon. So if we pay, yes, but we cannot pay a lot. So I'm not sure we will be able to have our dedicated specific chip. The problem is not the design, it's the manufacturing of the chip. The design, we can probably quickly make a design with what we need, but then you need to enter in all the manufacturing of the ASIC, of the technology, the testing, and this costs a fortune. So what do we do? And here we look, we think out of the box, and we look at what has been done in ProArtis. And in ProArtis, what they look at is that we are very pessimistic with the worst case that we estimate. And we are pessimistic because the estimation of the worst case in the future is based on the history of what happened. And now the history cannot be predicted as well, cannot be characterized, because so many things can happen in the multi-core with cache that you cannot use it to predict history. You could have a good worst-case estimation if you know exactly what happened before. But if you have a small uncertainty, maybe 1% of uncertainty, immediately your worst case go to the maximum. And of course you have a bit of uncertainty. You cannot predict everything. So whatever we do, the worst case will be the worst case. Will be 20 times worse than what we have today. So if it is the case, let's push the cursor exactly on the opposite, and let's be fully stochastic and fully random. We cannot predict, okay, so let's ask the hazard to tell us what will happen. And this is what they are looking at in ProArtis. And the results, the preliminary results are interesting. So the top line means what's happened when you want to be deterministic. So when you want that, you have an average execution time, which is reasonable. Then you make some tests with worst case scenario that you think about, and you have the worst case execution time that you can observe. And then if you push further with a theoretical analysis, you have the worst case theoretical, which is a 20 times catastrophe. Instead of having that, you go to fully random and you observe two things. The first one is that the average execution time is a bit worse than the one above, but not so much. I don't know exactly the figures, maybe 10–20%. Bon, you misuse a little bit your computer, but okay, for 10–20% it's not a catastrophe. And the second interesting thing is that you can give a probability to exceed your average execution time. And this becomes very interesting because you can say, for example, that the probability to have 20% of excess of my execution time is 10⁻⁷. And what is interesting is that the probability gets down very quick around the average. So it's not that you will have a probability of 0.5 to have a small excess. No, you go directly to 10 minus 7. If you go 30%, you are at 10 minus 15. And these figures are the same which are used in aeronautics to characterize an event which is catastrophic, which and so on. I think that an aircraft, if you want to avoid to kill passengers, the probability is 10 minus 10, 12, something like that. Here we have, what, 25% of execution time. So the worst case here doesn't need to be 20 times worst, but only 20%. The problem which is associated to that is that we now need to talk in terms of software failure. We know very well the hardware failure, it has a probability to fail. Now the software will have a probability to fail as well. And when we go to our software product assurance people, they jump on the table because they say, no, software has not a probability to fail. If you have a problem in software, it's a design error. Yes, but the design errors are built in, and we cannot avoid the design errors due to multicore and so on, and to randomness. So we will have to talk about failure of software, and these are constrained because you need that the shape of the probability of failure respects some very precise criteria to be similar to the hardware one. So we need to train a little bit our software PA to accept this notion. And I have started a testing, but it's a long time for a conclusion. So what we have seen today is that we have multi-cores because we have the problem of the power and the problem of the technology, which is below. So they are more complex for software people, but we will have to use it. Space domain, we'll have to use it probably in the future, but not in the near future, so we have a bit of time to prepare all the technologies that we need. Instead of that, we could use a DSP for most of the use case, but we don't have one, so we are stuck with multi-core. Multi-core will probably be used in combination with time and space partitioning, so for dependability, but probably not for security, because this creates a lot of constraint on the hardware. And we need to work mainly on the hardware understanding, to understand how it works, and to foresee the mitigation, I would say, in the software. So we need a qualified hypervisor with dynamic scheduling policy for partition, interrupt-driven, and so on. We need the same for the SMP, qualified SMP real-time operating system. And we need all the tools which goes with them to analyze the real-time, to predict, to bound, to make schedulability analysis. We can have also language extension, and probably ADA 2012 reply partly to these needs. And we might have to prepare our software PA people to think in terms of stochastic error. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I have to give credit to my colleagues in ESA who have contributed to this presentation, as well as some studies outside. And as I didn't talk enough about ADA 2012, I have stolen the logo on the ADA Core website to show you that, you see, I share and I support the sentence which is written there. Thank you.
All right. I've been watching very carefully the audience, and I've seen that you've been very, very attentive, which is good. So, well done, Jean-Luc. Now we have some time for questions, and I will take a few. You start.
Yes. Your quad-core design, you said that you push right through the L1 cache. Did you think about the option of, instead of having to load from L2, then gives exception and have the programmer have to recover back to a safe state?
No, because in fact this has been done at hardware level. So the hardware wants to be to deliver to software a system which tries to secure its integrity himself. So that's why they have taken this decision. I must say that it was a lot of discussion. Well, I've been told that it was a lot of discussion in the hardware community about what to do and so on. I think they could have implemented some sort of scratchpad or something to rescue the data. Also, another problem with the L1, if you don't make it right through, is the decorrelation of the loss of the coherency of the cache between the cores and so on, and then you need snooping and so on, so it complexifies also the hardware. I think I would prefer that the hardware manage this problem and doesn't send an exception to software, because what could we do? You know, if we have a memory corrupted, we have a big problem. So we can try to restart the task. So if it is a control algorithm for the descent and landing, okay, we lose one cycle. Maybe the algorithm can recover. Otherwise, you lose the science data. So it depends on the criticality of the software and what is the effect of this problem on the system itself. But generally, when you have this sort of problem, you reboot the processor. So it's very difficult at software level to understand, you know, to have very sophisticated recovery measure at local level in a small procedure. So you consider this globally and you say, okay, shit, I have a problem, so reboot.
Right, more questions?
Not a question, a comment.
On the mic. Like in a parliament.
Press button, yeah.
Press button, yes.
Sure. You mentioned Palmarasa and ProArSys. I've actually brought some leaflets with me describing those projects. So if anyone's interested to find out more, we have them on our booth.
Learn about it.
Yes, I think it deserves to have a look at that. And by the way, ProArTis will use the NGMP, I think, to exercise this policy, because we have a possibility to configure the cache in random. So I'm not sure it is the right random way. I'm not sure that you would not need also other elements in the hardware to be also random. I think it's only the cache which is random. So maybe you would need more, but at least it allows to expose the NGMP to this philosophy and to see where we are.
Right, more. Back.
Was there any consideration of leaving the partitioning, basically partition the whole chip, that is, you devote all the cores to a given task, and then you switch all those cores to another task, basically to provide security so that at any given time all the cores are devoted to the same partition, if you want to think about it that way. Essentially exactly the opposite, that is, you devote all the cores to a given partition at a given time, as opposed to giving one per partition.
So you suggest to put one partition per core? No?
Opposite, the opposite. That is, at any given moment, all the cores are devoted to one partition. Then you switch to a new partition, all the cores go to that next partition. That is, each partition is multi-core, yes, and it uses all the cores itself.
Each partition is multi-core. So I read an article about that, where on the long term you have problem in synchronization of all the cores in the switch of partition. Because, well, for some hardware reason, if you decide, when you give the top to switch all the partition, the 4 cores doesn't react exactly at the same time. And then you start to decorrelate, and you could have sometimes, if really you have bad luck, but we have bad luck generally, the next partition using data which is still in the old partition. And then you crash all your system. So the problem of synchronization of the partition switch on all the cores is not solved for the moment.
Right. More questions?
You mentioned that you got a speed up factor of 1.8 using a simulated environment, right? I'm curious to know what kind of onboard software image did you use for that benchmark? Was it representative enough of a real onboard software?
It is a real onboard software, so it is not a real, but the problem that we have is that we have a scientific algorithm to implement. So the scientific algorithm has been given to us by the science department, and then we have written it in something that looks like onboard software. We turn it on a PC, and then after we ported it on the Leon, and then on the NGMP. And this is what we get. So that's why I said that maybe there is room to improve the way that the algorithm is written. I think if we go really inside and we try to optimize, knowing what will happen here, I think we have room for improvement.
Or for worsening.
If we make a
Worse,
mistake,
yeah.
yes.
Alan?
Given that the bus is typically the problem in a multi-core and is increasingly the problem as you add more and more cores, have you looked at different sorts of on-chip technology, network on-chip technology, rather than bus technology?
Personally, I like this idea because for me the best is the classical avionics. You have several computers on the 1553, so if you put everything on a chip, I can recognize my stuff because it's the same software as before. So, however, for some reasons that I don't fully control, the network of on-chip technology in ESA has not been given priority. We have people that work on that. There has been some development that shows that it could be possible, and however, in the research and development plan where we have a limited amount of money, the hardware people have put priority, and not only the ESA hardware people, but it has been in what we call harmonization, so it has been presented to industry and to political people. And industry has not given priority to the network on chip. So, but we are still looking at that.
Some wisdom. Any more questions? We still have a few seconds, so don't hesitate. Don't be shy. Yes, please.
You talked about a 1-bit error being corrected or spotted by the parity bit. How often do you get, let's say, a 1-bit error that can be as compared to a 2-bit error that doesn't get spotted by the parity bit?
The reply is simple. It depends. It depends where you are in the universe, because you could cross what is called a radiation belt, and so you could maybe never get it if you are outside the radiation or far from the sun, or I don't know. And sometimes you can have a lot of it. And this is reported generally by the operation people who, in the telemetry, the single event upset are sent back to operation. So they have a cartography of the universe where they know exactly where there are more radiation than others. Now, the frequency of radiation, I must say that I don't remember the precise figure. It doesn't happen every second. It is, I don't know, 1 per day or 1 per month or things like that.
The rumor has it, when I first joined ESA, I wanted to visit all projects and ask them exactly this question. It took me 6 months and a lot of frustration because there's no data apparently. So rumor has it 1 per day. Whether this is true or not, but not frequently. However, when it happens, it has happened. That's the problem.
It's enough once in the life of the spacecraft to have a problem. So now what we do to mitigate the problem that Tullio rightly said is to put a radiation monitoring system on most of the spacecraft. So you have a specific CCD, I think, which monitors the radiation, so it is there to count what happened and so on. So I think that now they improve the knowledge.
I could go back to this.
Yeah, you would have less frustration.
All right, coming to an end. I think we should be thanking the speaker and then one announcement. So now I think if you look at